started as a job, but turned into the biggest discovery of her life.
May Whitlock thought it would be just another job. She had taken plenty like it before, temporary gigs that kept the lights on just long enough to delay the inevitable. This one seemed like more of the same, a cook needed for a remote ranch, long hours, good pay, no frills, no promises. She took a bus across 3 counties and hitched a ride the rest of the way, arriving dusty and disheartened under a sky so wide it felt like it could swallow her whole. Black Hollow Ranch sat at the edge of nowhere, surrounded by dry hills and an eerie kind of stillness. It did not feel like a normal place. The wind whispered through the grass like it had secrets, and even the sun seemed to hang just a little lower than it should. The Cowboys did not talk much when she arrived. They just gave her a nod, showed her to a small cabin, and told her when breakfast was expected. Their names were Sharp and Strange, Jack's call to Trace and Shade. They moved like men who knew the land with a deeper instinct, and they watched the sky more than they watched each other. She noticed early on that none of them ever removed their boots, even when eating or resting, and they all wore strange metal pendants tucked beneath their shirts. May settled in quickly, cooking meals, helping with supplies, staying out of the way, but the ranch did not feel normal. The air was heavy with silence, and the earth seemed to hum. At night she would see shadows moving across the hills, riders with no horses, figures too tall and too still. Once she spotted one of the Cowboys, Jack, standing in the barn, shirt unbuttoned, strange symbols etched into his skin like glowing tattoos. His eyes met hers and he said softly, "You were not supposed to see that, but now you will." And then he vanished, not walked away, not ran, just disappeared like smoke into air. The next morning he was hauling hay like nothing had happened. May considered leaving. She packed twice, but every time she looked back at the land something stopped her. It was like the soil itself called to her like rocks. May ran to help him, sure he was dead, but when she reached him his skin was glowing from beneath like fire trapped in flesh. He looked up at her and whispered, "If you believe the dust will not touch you," and then he passed out. When she told Shade what she saw, he said nothing. He only picked up Coulter like he weighed nothing and carried him to a stone cellar behind the chapel on the hill, the chapel that no one ever mentioned, the one she was told not to go near, but she did late one night. Curiosity stronger than fear, she followed a trail of lanterns that led to the chapel. She stayed low, hidden behind the tall grass, and saw the Cowboys kneeling in a circle, hands pressed to the earth, whispering in a language she did not know. A light, not fire, not natural, glowed beneath the wooden floorboards. She felt it in her chest, a rhythm like a second heartbeat. She fell backward, startled, and landed beneath the twisted roots of an old willow tree, and for a moment she swore she heard the tree whisper, "You know the truth now." Later Jax came to her cabin. "You saw," he said. "What are you?" she asked. "We were never men," he replied. "Not at first. We were something else, fire rage guardians, bound to the land." When the gate fell, May stared at him. "What gate?" "There is a line," he said, "between this world and what waits beyond it. It used to be protected. When the old ones fell, we were all that remained." He told her their names were not names at all, but rolls, pieces of a circle, remnants of a force meant to keep the gate closed. But the seal was breaking, and now that she had seen she was part of it, May tried to deny it. She told herself they were mad, that it was heat, exhaustion, delusion. But the land kept speaking. She began to hear it. The wind carried voices, the soil answered her footsteps. When she cooked, the fire moved with her mood. She dreamed of flame and light and endless gates. She started to believe, and then the sky cracked. It happened without warning, a storm that was not weather, a brightness that was not lightning. The air filled with a pressure like something had been torn open. The chapel burst with golden fire, and from the center of it all came a woman in a long red cloak, eyes glowing like coals, voice echoing across the hills. "The gate is open." The Cowboys gathered around May. Shade handed her a blade carved from obsidian. Coulter spoke ancient words. Trace knelt at her feet. Jack stood behind her and said, "It is you. It has always been you. You are the ember, the last spark you can call the flame." May did not know what that meant, but she felt the fire grow in her chest. She stepped forward into the light, and the sky bowed. The light did not burn her, it welcomed her. It wrapped around her skin like memory, and for the first time she understood. This was not the beginning, it was the return. She had been here before, not in this body, not in this time, but somewhere in the old fire, in the first circle where names were made and bound to the land. The woman in the red cloak looked into her eyes and spoke not with sound but with thought, and May felt a rush of images, gates, mountain storms, wars, a line drawn in ancient ash, and her own hand reaching to hold it shut. The Cowboys stood behind her, silent, reverent, their heads bowed, their shadows stretched long against the chapel wall. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the golden flame flared brighter as something beyond it stirred. The gate was no longer sealed, it pulsed like a wound, and through its edge May saw figures gathering, not yet through, not yet whole, but close. She turned to Jax, and said, "What do we do?" And he said, "We make the choice again, we stand or we fall. And it must be you who commands it now, not us, not anymore. The guardians cannot guard without the flame, and the flame is yours." She stepped closer to the gate, felt its heat, its hunger, its pleading, and within it heard voices, some familiar, some ancient, and then one voice clearer than the rest, her mother's, calling her name, not her earthly mother, but something older, the one who bore her in the fire before time. May reached into her chest and drew forth a strand of light. It unraveled from her rib like silk, and as she held it, the gate screamed. It did not want to close, it wanted to be fed, to pour its darkness into the world and reshape it with ruin. But May was not afraid, not anymore. She threw the strand into the flame, and the fire roared high into the clouds, and then everything went silent. The gate sealed itself, the earth stilled, and the red-cloaked woman vanished like a candle snuffed out. The Cowboys fell to one knee, and the stone chapel cracked from its roof to its roots. The sky cleared, and the sun rose where it had not been for hours, maybe days, maybe longer. Jax looked up at her, and said, "You did it," and May shook her head and said, "We did it," but he only smiled and said, "No, the flame chooses its keeper, and you kept the gate." Then they all stood together, and for the first time since arriving, May felt the land breathe, the soil hummed a song of balance. The wind was no longer a whisper, but a voice saying thank you, and somewhere far beyond, where the eye could see, the other gates began to hum and answer, some still closed, some waking, some watching, and May knew this was not the end. It was a warning, a call to prepare. The flame would be needed again, and next time she would not be alone. She would train others, call the new circle, build a home not just for warriors but for watchers, for weavers of light and shadow, for those who remembered the fire, and for those who had never seen it. She would make Black Hollow more than a ranch. She would make it the beginning of something that could not be forgotten, and the Cowboys would ride again, not just to guard but to guide, under skies that now knew her name. For a while the land was quiet, the skies steady, the wind soft, and the nights calm. May spent her days rebuilding what the fire had broken. The old chapel was gone, but in its place she raised a stone circle with her own hands, guided by the Cowboys and the voice of the land itself. They planted lightwood trees around its edge, and beneath the soil buried relics, not of gold or war but of memory. Her mother's ring, a child's toy, a broken blade once used to protect the valley, now made whole again. This new place was not for worship, it was for watching, it was for waiting. She called it the circle of return, and around it she began to gather people, not just wanderers and workers, but those who had seen the thin veil between what is and what waits. She taught them how to listen to silence, how to read the ground, how to breathe in rhythm with the valley. She did not call them soldiers, she called them seeds, and they grew under her guidance, and beside her the Cowboys changed too. Jax spoke more now, not much, but enough to reveal a story behind his fire. Coulter became the storyteller, teaching the youngest how to hold a knife, not to wound but to draw lines in the earth that held memory. Trace walked the hills alone each morning, whispering to the spirits that guarded the wind and shade, vanished sometimes for days, only to return with eyes full of thunder and warnings on his tongue. "Something is shifting," he said one evening while the trees bent toward the sun too fast. The birds were flying backward. The creek stopped at midnight and started again at noon. "Something old is waking, not just here but everywhere," and May felt it too in the way her dreams no longer stayed inside sleep, how they walked with her in the daylight, and how she could sometimes see things in people's shadows, things that moved before they did. One night she stood at the edge of the valley looking toward the distant mountains, and she saw fire there, not wild, not angry, but watching, the same fire that once lived inside her now reflected